Today's episode of the What's That Like podcast is brought to you by Opera House Brewing Company, Hillsboro, Illinois. Hashtag drink local.
What's that like?
What's going on, people? Hey, it's another edition of the What's That Like podcast, and I'm your host, John Knowles. Hey, episode 2 of season 3. Great guest up on the way today, Dennis Carlock, aka Rotten Rod. You may have heard of him if you're from this area. I'm sure you probably have. Coffeen, Illinois boy, and he's currently the lead singer of AZDZ. That is an AC/DC tribute band out of St. Louis, and they've got a big show coming up, The Monsters Amok, at the Family Arena on October 19th, and we're going to hear all about Rod and his journey, and he went to the Sunset Strip and how cool it was and the stories, and he just talks about how it was being out there in L.A. during that time in the 80s when everything was crazily happening, and I brought my buddy, Toby Baugher, on. Toby is my fellow guitar player in the band Retro Rocket, and I was talking to him. I said, "Oh, Rod's coming over." He goes, "Oh, you got to ask him about this, and you got to ask him about that." I'm like, "Well, Tobe, sounds like you got to be a good co-host this time." So we brought Toby Baugher over from Retro Rocket as a co-host on this show. You'll hear him as we go through it. You can see Toby and I both. We've got a couple of shows coming up with Retro Rocket on October 19th at the Halftime Bar and Grill, and October 26th at the Opera House. Right outside there in Hillsboro, Illinois. Both those shows in Hillsboro, Illinois. And speaking of the Opera House, this show, once again, brought to you by the Opera House. New beer. They got a new beer this month. It's apparently very popular. It's called Oktoberfest. Hillsboro Hilltoppers. Oktoberfest, and you get Oktoberfest. So cool stuff indeed. I want to thank those folks at the Opera House for bringing you the What's That Like podcast each and every week. Opera House Brewery, Hillsboro, Illinois. Hashtag drink local. Well, let's get right to Rod. I want to get you to hear all about this stuff. 20 plus years on the LA Sunset Strip. What was that like? So we're here on the What's That Like podcast. Today's guest is Rotten Rod, Dennis Carlock from Coffeen, Illinois. You all know him as Rotten Rod. I got a co-host on today's show, Toby Baugher. And the reason we got Toby in here is I was telling Toby the other day, we're going to interview Rotten Rod. He goes, "Oh, you got to ask him this. You got to ask him that." And I said, "Well, why don't you just come over, man?" So Rotten, Toby, welcome to What's That Like podcast. How you guys doing?
Great. Thank you.
Having a good time.
Is this your first podcast, Rod?
I think it is. You know what? I don't think it is, but it's been a while.
And when you think about your life story and all the stuff we're going to get to, tell me about where you started. How did you get going?
My very first concert was in 1973. My brother took me to Springfield to see Black Oak, Arkansas.
And they were just there again.
And I just seen them there Sunday night.
Yeah.
But this was at the Armory. And the Armory was in Springfield, and the tickets were like $4.50. The opening act was King Crimson and the Straubs in Black Oak, Arkansas. Well, anyway, watching this concert and everything, and seeing Jim Dandy do his thing, I was kind of like watching Elvis and thinking, you know what, that would be a good job. And you've heard this scenario before. Other people say the same type of things about Elvis and everything. Before that, going back even further, I can remember being a kid and having 45 singles that were given to me and having a record player that would just play one at a time, but you could stack them on top of.
Right.
And it only play singles, right? Well, I can remember playing on our front porch, putting them records on there and singing to them and pretending that I had an audience to me.
And this was in Coffeen.
Yeah, out in the country on the front porch. Well, that dates way back. We're talking early 60s. But I didn't get involved into music until after I was home out of the Army. And we're talking, I'm a late bloomer. I didn't get until my early 20s. I didn't know how to do, I never took choir or anything in school because I thought that was for sissies. But I went and seen some friends of mine from Hillsboro. They had a punk band. Tony Bramall and Danny Klotfelder, a couple other guys, they had a punk band. And they weren't very good, but they were good enough to have an audience. And I thought to myself, well, you know what? Anybody can do this. So I started out as punk rock. because anybody could do it. You didn't have to be very good.
3 chords and playing fast.
Yes.
Part of it.
And I got a guitar. I started taking lessons over at Iker's Music in Litchfield. Within a few months, I put together a band, and we were playing 3-chord songs, and it was mostly originals because that was easier, and then trying to pick up some cover tunes and everything. And I started out, had a couple bands here. One of them was called Agent Orange, and one of them was called Raw 10. And my buddy that had the punk band here, he moved to California. His name was Tony Bramall. And he went out there on a mission, and he's still out there. And he's been all over the world. He's got more vinyl than you can shake a stick at. But he was my incentive, and I followed him out to California.
What year did you get in? You said you came home from the Army.
Mm-hmm.
What year is this?
That's 1976.
Okay.
And I started attempting to play music in 1978, 79.
What was your first gig? Where was it?
That would have been at the Butler Community Center.
Were you just promoted your own show? Did you open? What happened there?
At that time, I had Lloyd Irwin was playing bass, and Jimmy Logston was playing drums, and I forget the guitar player's name was. But we opened up for Hailstorm. Wayne Hale was a guitar player from Litchfield that had a reputation, and he had a band there, and we opened up for him. And that was probably 1979.
Really? And just an opening show, played how many, like 8 songs?
You know what? We only played a few, and I think we got booed off the stage.
Great start, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that you mentioned the names were Agent Orange and Raw 10. So is that where the name Rotten Rod comes from? Raw 10? Where does this come from?
Rotten Rod, I ripped that off of Johnny Rotten from the Sex Pistols.
Okay.
And Raw 10 was from Rotten, because if you say Raw 10 fast, that's what it comes out to.
Mm-hmm.
But I lifted that off Johnny Rotten because I was impressed with the Sex Pistols, and that's what the hell I wanted to sound like and what I wanted them to be like.
So you played mostly originals. What were some of the names of the songs?
You know what? I gave you the CD.
Oh, it's right behind me over here. I'll grab it in a second. But and you're playing all these songs back then. You got going.
Those songs on the CD are the same songs that I wrote here. And you got Piece of Cake, The Rod is Rotten, Died Today, Me Against the World, Lack of Remorse, Punk Invasion, Life of Crime, Mass Suicide. These same songs.
So it's a Christian album.
Yes. but these songs, when I moved to California, I went out there and I was intimidated so much by the guitar players out there that I set my guitar down. Because everybody out there was Van Halen.
Yeah.
Shred machines.
Yes.
And what year did you go to California?
1982.
Okay. So you had about 3 years in this area that you were hitting the boards, hitting all the places. In 1979 to 82, where did you guys play? I mean, I know what the circuit looks like today with the clubs that are left, the bars. Where were you guys playing?
You know what? We played basically places that we rented out and had our own shows because we were playing an hour, our own sets, just and we'd have other bands play it too, but there wasn't like the 4-hour cover band type thing. So we the bars and stuff wouldn't have us. So we were just renting our own venues. We played a couple gigs in Witt, and we played over in Butler a lot at the community center. We played a bunch of parties, and I used to throw some hellicious parties in Coffeen. And at the same time, my drummer and guitar player from Raw 10 had another band. They had a cover band called Izzy, and they were playing the 4-hour gigs in the bars and the clubs all around here and also in Iowa. And I would roadie for those guys, and I would jump up with them and do one set of AC/DC and Judas Priest and things of that nature.
Gotcha.
And, I would play one set out of 3 or 4, and the other 3 I'd roadie for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, 82, we talked about you went to California in 82. Mm-hmm. What made you go? You said you followed a friend out there, but what was the determining factor in your head that said, I got to get out of this place and go west?
MTV was big. Mm-hmm. MTV was just, become huge. And I knew that around here that I couldn't do nothing around here with my own material. And, everybody wants to dance, and my stuff isn't stuff you can dance to. When Tony Bramall went out there, he kind of like led the way. And a year later, I followed him. I just, you know what? I took the big step. I bought an old Chevy van for $200. I put a new motor in it that my dad gave me. I painted it black, and I painted a white skull and crossbones on the side.
I've seen pictures of this on your Facebook.
And I headed to California.
Yeah.
When I first got out there, I was in Hollywood with Bramall, and he was living in Hollywood, and he was struggling, but he was playing. He'd already put out a couple albums with a couple different bands, and he was established, and he had his own thing going. I hung out with him for a while, then relocated to North Hollywood with Paul Kaderko, a Hillsboro boy. Yeah. He was out there working in the TV industry, and I slept on his couch for a month until I got established down in Orange County with another friend from Coffee that lived out there. And I was at the same time trying to get in bands, auditioning and looking for stuff, and also trying to find a day gig to, help pay the bills and everything.
So I'm thinking, you said 79 you get into music, 82 you left, but you did this all after you got out of the Army. How old are you at this point?
When I got home out of the Army, I was 20. Okay. When I started playing music, I was 22. When I headed to California, I was 26. And in the scheme of things, that's already an old man in rock and roll.
Exactly. That's going to be my next question. Were you the old guy?
Yes. Because everybody at that time, everybody's looking for Def Leppard, and Def Leppard was all teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got out there, I started jamming with young guys, that were in their teens, and I was always considered the old man. And there was always a myth, if you was over 25, it was like you was already too old.
But you could sing.
Yeah.
Or if you're a great shredding guitar player, you might be able to find some space for you.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? There was truth to that, and at the same time, it was malarkey. Because if you got the chops and you got the material and everything, but it was the myth that the record executives were looking for young people that they could groom and capitalize on and have for a long time.
And make a video for MTV.
Yeah.
Yeah. So who was, you get there, and who's the kings of the strip? Van Halen had come and gone.
You know what? This is funny now. Okay, that was 1982. Well, by October of 82, by the very first part of 83, I was singing in a heavy metal band called Nightmare. And we were playing the same clubs where Slayer and Metallica and bands like that were playing. And we did a gig the night before Great White headlined a club called the Woodstock. And the Woodstock was a famous club in Anaheim. We played the night before Great White. No, the night after. Let me take that back. They played Friday, we played Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Russell came back that night just so he could get a bunch of pats on the back how good he sounded the night before. And he's seen us play. And after the show, he come up to us backstage and wanted to produce us. He said, "Hey, I like what you got. I want to go in the studio and I want to produce you guys." So we set up everything around his schedule, and he flaked on us. But we were, that was in 1983. So within 6 months, I was in a gig that was good enough to attract Jack Russell. But unfortunately, that was about the only time we ever had somebody come up and say, "Hey," and we didn't get that big break where it was the record producer or the guy with the money or the agent or Colonel Tom Parker. But it looked good at first, but it just didn't pan out there.
And you were doing punk rock, right?
No, that was heavy metal.
Okay, heavy metal. All right.
Well, and out in California at that time, there were several different factions. There was punk rockers, there was heavy metal, there was new wave, there was mod, there was alternative. There was a zillion different genres. And I bounced back between punk and metal. And to be honest with you, I went to some real punk shows. I went down, I seen Suicidal Tendencies,
Mm-hmm.
Dead Kennedys, TSOL, and a bunch of other Fear. And these concerts, the mosh pits and all the stuff going on, I tell you what, you got to see it to believe it, but it was very intimidating. And it's like, those people are crazy. Crazy in a bad way.
Yeah.
Or violent. And, they didn't mind getting bloody and the mosh pits and everything. It was plumb violence. And I kind of like seen what real punk was. Not country punk from Coffee, but what real LA punk was. And I started going towards the heavy metal.
What was your days like back then? You're playing in Nightmare. You said you were looking for a job. Did you have one? What was your days like?
I did get hooked up. I worked a bunch of part-time jobs on the employment agencies where they send you places. But after about a half a year, I got hooked up with a serious job working civil service for the United States Navy at Seal Beach Naval Weapons Station. And I ended up working there 29 years.
So you're doing this during the day?
Yep.
And you're rocking all night, punk
Yep.
rocking. When did you sleep?
You know what? It didn't happen every night, but whenever it went down like that, I would get probably 4 or 5 hours, and I would go into work wearing my eyeliner because I had my stage makeup on, but they got used to it. I had long hair and then it looked like somebody had a Kiss or whatever, but I did my job and I held it and made it there on time and worked there for 29 years and was able to retire.
Let's talk about the job for a second. We'll come back to the center. What'd you do for 29 years?
For the first 8 years, I worked in the supply department, basically run supplies around and unloaded and stored stuff. Mm-hmm. And then the second half of my time there, 2/3 time there, I got in with the ordnance. It was a weapons station. So for 20 years, I was working around every kind of explosive imaginable, everything but nukes. We handled everything but small caliber all the way up to cruise missiles. And receiving them, storing them, shipping them. And this was a time when Operation Freedom and Desert Storm was going. We were working 7 days a week for about a year. And I was rock and rolling at night.
How many shows a week were you doing? Were you self-promoting? Were the guys in your band? Were you the guy that was working and everybody else is sleeping on, crashing on couches? How did that go?
Yes and no. I mean, those guys all had their jobs too and stuff, and some of them were bums. But we average, out there when you're doing your original material, it just depends, but usually you played a gig or two a week. But at the same time, you rehearsed 2 or 3 times a week. And out there, anytime you rehearse, you have to go to a rehearsal studio, and it costs you money by the hour, or you get your own room and go monthly, or you have your own studio somewhere. But there is no such thing as rehearsing in a house or a garage. There's no such thing.
You said you went out in the early 80s is when you were starting to play around, and say 82, and I think it was 83 was probably when I discovered the Rod Rocks California. There was a music store downtown Hillsboro, Marshall Street Music.
Yeah.
I went there as a 11-year-old 6th grader to buy a guitar because I quit the band thinking that was going to interfere with summer baseball.
The school band.
The school band, the band lessons. I was told we were going to have band lessons, and I thought, that's going to interfere with baseball. I can't do that. So I switched from saxophone to electric guitar. Bought my first electric guitar for $100, and Rich Vincent says he's going to throw in a free case. I get the case, and on the case is a sticker that says, The Rod Rocks California. I'm like, who's the Rod?
This is kind of like This Is Your Life, Rod. Because
okay.
Get it, Tobe.
I actually have sent you a picture of this, but I'm going to show it to you in person. Hold on.
Yes, I've seen it, yeah.
What do you think? He's got the case. He brought it just to show you.
All right. The Rod was my stage name. I got that tacked on to me when I worked at the glass factory in Hillsboro. One of Black Oak, Arkansas's songs is Hot Rod. And I would be working around there or running around there at work. I was a sweeper. I'd have to sweep up the broken glass. And I'd use that broom as my guitar. And I'd be air guitaring everybody and singing them Hot Rod. And if they were real lucky, I would get a bottle of tomato juice and show them my Gene Simmons impression. Okay. Now, but anyway, my nickname was The Rod. Okay, because I was always singing Hot Rod. And there was a fellow there at the glass factory, I don't know which one, but he had a homemade, he could make homemade bumper stickers. And I commissioned him to make me some bumper stickers that said, The Rod Rocks On, and the Rod is rotten. And they started showing up on all the people that worked at the glass factory's bumpers. Okay. And when I moved to California, I had some professional bumper stickers made that says The Rod Rocks California, had the skull and crossbones on it. And I had 1,000 of them made. And my good friend and later became my roommate and stage manager, Derek Malloy, lived in Coffeen, the stud Malloy. I sent him a stack of them, and they started floating everywhere around here. And they were selling them at that record store in Hillsboro, and they were selling them at an arcade in Coffeen called the Green Door. Those are far and few in between.
Okay, there's one.
So how cool is it, Toby? You know, we didn't mention at the start. You're in the band Retro Rocket with me. That's
Right.
how we're buddies. And we were talking about having Rod come over the other day, and you go, "Oh man, that'd be so cool. Make sure you ask him this and that." And I go, "Just come over. You could be on the show too."
The bottom line is we're music geeks.
Yeah. And I think, I think it's so cool. Your actual start in rock and roll goes back to something that Rod actually influenced at some point. Does that make you feel old, Rod?
Yeah, but you know what? It's
inspiring.
cool. It's cool because you hear the same stories about the big boys. You know, everybody's in. You guys, I see Van Halen everywhere, and there's one little thing of me over there that hey, I on such a smaller scale, but I did do something.
But that question crossed my mind. I don't know how many times. Who's the Rod? And I'd always heard the name Denny Carlock and Caffeine, and I was just like, Caffeine, heavy metal. It just didn't compute. Because I was a huge fan of the '80s bands, and then once I got to kind of know who you were, know of you, and your story of going out there and pursuing your dream, I mean, totally cool, and just didn't know all the fine details.
When I was with the band Izzy, we were playing up in Iowa. I forget the name of the bar or what city it was, but way up in Iowa. And after the show, we went to somebody's house, and it was like the first week of MTV. And it was the after hours party, and we were all mesmerized. We sat there at that TV and watched MTV till like the sun come up. It was an event.
Yeah.
And sadly to say, MTV's long gone. What we knew it.
Right.
But
It's initials only. There's no music on MTV.
When I moved to California, I had this old Chevy van. Like I said, it was painted black with a skull and crossbones on it. And we played a party. Ken Mead threw an event at the Moose Hall in Hillsboro. He was the promoter, and the Raw 10 was the headliners. Izzy played before that, and a Hillsboro band called the Screws with Roy Robinson and Cliff Edwards. But the Screws were the opening act. Well, that was on October 10th, 1982. On October 12th, I rolled into California, and I drove straight through. I drove that van. I would pull over and sleep a few hours, but my mom gave me a big tub of chocolate chip cookies, and that's all I ate for 2 days. I was in such a hurry. All I did was stop for gas and get an hour or two of sleep, but I rolled into L.A. on October 12th.
Probably lots of people around the country were doing the same thing, headed to Hollywood.
Back in those days, there was a paper out there, a weekly paper called The Recycler, and you could put free ads in it, bands seeking musicians, musicians seeking ads, guitars, amps for sale, guitars for sale, anything you had, you could put in there. And this was like a newspaper size paper. The musicians seeking ads would be 3 or 4 pages. The band seeking musicians would be 3 or 4 pages. There was literally 1,000 different on each, 1,000 different chances to find something. And I started putting ads out. Rotten singer seeks rotten band. And I got a call from a young guitar player that was about 16 or 17. He was 17 years old. And he said, "We're putting something together, and we'd like for you to come over here." All right. This was down in Orange County. Long story short, I pull up, and it's a nice neighborhood, very nice neighborhood, nice homes. I pull up there, and they freak out with my van. They freak out.
There goes the neighborhood.
And it happened to be Joey Cagle, which is Joey Allen from Warren. And I used to jam in his garage, and we briefly had something going on, and we played some parties and everything. And that's how I met Joey. I've had Thanksgiving dinner at his house before. And he later on went to Warren.
Right.
But he played with me for a while, and his very first recordings are on one of my albums.
And I see you posting all the time. A lot lately. You've been kind of sharing Nightmare records, Nightmare 2 records that are for sale in Europe, eBay.
Yeah.
Tell me about that band. And you met Joey. He was part of that group or no?
You know what? He did recording sessions but did not jam live with us.
Okay.
But before that happened, I jammed with him and his project in people's living rooms, parties and stuff where, hey, their parents are gone. Let's have a party. Whenever you play a party in California, somebody's backyard party, you're guaranteed the cops are going to come. This is just a matter of time. So you usually got 15 to 20 minutes. So whenever you crack that first note, you take off like a bat out of hell and you don't stop until the cops come.
And how big were they? I've read the Van Halen book where they talk about the Battle of Pasadena or wherever, and they had 2,000 and 3,000 folks showing up. That seems like it couldn't have been that big, but what were those parties?
Maybe that's
like?
why the songs were so short.
Yeah, I guess that's true. You get more in.
I don't know. Maybe Pasadena was more spread out and they had more room to play with, but the parties I'm talking about, usually there was 100 to 200 people there. The backyard would be full, or the house and backyard, whatever. But I played many of them, and we got it down to a science. Said, hey, there's no sound check. Once you plug everything in and turn it on, it's a race to the clock till the cops come. And you usually got in 3 or 4 songs.
And did they bust you up? Go to jail? You just turn it off?
No. Hey, neighbors are complaining. You gotta shut it down. Okay. Shut it down. I remember one party we played. Some guy, the owner there, he said, hey, come check this out. And we went inside his garage, and he had a big aquarium in there with rattlesnakes in it, which is against the law.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't know what the hell he was going to see out there.
Tell me about, you walked past a poster I have on the wall a while ago with Van Halen at the Whiskey. Yeah. And you said, I played there a bunch of times.
Yes, I have.
Tell me about the Whiskey. Tell me about playing the Strip. Tell me what was all that like.
Have you ever been there?
I have.
Well, the Strip isn't very long right there where everything's going on at.
The rainbows right there.
They're all crammed together. Right. Okay, well, the Whiskey A Go-Go sits there on Sunset Boulevard all the way at the end. And if you keep going, it's just another mile or two, you're on Rodeo Drive and you're where the big mansions are and everything. But
right.
First gig I ever played at the Whiskey was with Nightmare 2. We played there, but I played most of my gigs there with Rotten Rod and the Warheads. And I had several friends play there that at one time or another they'd say, hey, jump on stage and sing a song, whatever. The Whiskey A Go-Go's been there forever. House bands anywhere from Alice Cooper to The Doors to Van Halen, et cetera, et cetera. But it's one of these venues that everybody has played there. I really never did get my chance to play the big time, but at least I've shared some stages where some of the people that had made the big time.
Right.
If you was in the country, it's almost like playing the Grand Ole Opry. But then right down the street was a club called Gazzari's.
Mm-hmm.
And Van Halen was the house band at Gazzari's for quite a while. And I used to play Gazzari's a lot. And Gazzari's had 5 different stages. They had 5 different bands set up at the same time for their Sunday Battle of the Bands. And that's how you got your foot in the door, was you had to play the Battle of the Bands and see how you did. And Nightmare played there a bunch of times, and we did really well there. But they had 5 different stages. As soon as one band got done, the other one strike right up. There was not 2 minutes dead silence. They had 5 PAs and the whole 9 yards, 5 sound men and the whole 9, whatever. One thing about Gazzari's was it always stuck in my craw, or the Whiskey. When we played there, we were at the lowest level you could get. We had to pay to park in their parking lot.
Oh, jeez.
And the Whiskey had no parking lot, but you had to pay to park behind them. So you're playing these venues, and when you're at the low level, you're playing for exposure. You're not even getting paid any. If you're lucky, you get a few drink tickets. But here we are playing for free and having to shell out parking money to park our van in their parking lot.
How competitive was it?
It was very competitive. There was bands coming out the yin-yang. There was a lot of camaraderie and also a lot of adversaries or, competition.
Yeah.
And it just depends. If there was some bands that were really cool and other bands that, we ain't got time for friends. We're here on business and we're just, that Strip at the time, when you were playing shows there, you would be promoting your shows, and there would be a zillion bands out there and a zillion people with the bands, a zillion girls, and they'd all be passing out flyers or taking flyers. And the Strip would just be covered with flyers, and I believe now you can't do that. But back in the day, there'd be flyers on the telephone poles, cars, everywhere, there'd be flyers. A lot of people, if you passed a flyer out to them, they would look at it and look at you, and they would wad it up and throw it down at your feet. Like, you're not worthy. You're not worthy of my attention or my attendance. Well, and you know what? You could either get into a fist fight right then and there, or you just blow it off and say, you speak your mind and go on your way or whatever.
Did that motivate you even more?
You know what? Yes, but at the same token, it was like a kick in the teeth. But I'm going to tell you a brief story. I was in Redondo Beach seeing a band play, and Gene Simmons was working with this band. I can't remember the name of these guys, but he tried to put them on a label.
Tobe, you know?
Keel?
No.
Black and Blue?
No. No, they weren't even up to that level.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, I gave Gene Simmons a flyer. And I said, look, Gene, I've been to a bunch of your shows. Here's one of mine. Because I was playing that same venue a week or two later, And he looked down at me, and he took that flyer, and he looked at it, and he smiled, and he folded it up and put it in his back pocket.
I should have asked him if he still had it when I talked to him on September 1st. I should have asked. Next time, I'm going to ask him.
But I thought that was really cool that he did not embarrass me or degrade me by looking at it and scoffing and throwing it at my feet like a lot of other people have done.
I'll bet he has it because he keeps everything.
I hope so.
I bet he has it.
What are some of the bands and people out there that didn't make it that you were just so surprised by?
I tell you what, the bands that did make it, and I'm saying Van Halen, I'm saying Motley Crue, Dokken, Rat, Great White, Quiet Riot, all these bands, they were excellent, damn good bands. But I tell you what, I've seen 24 bands that were every bit as good. That a lot of them still ended up on major labels, but they just did not, for one reason or another, they imploded or something happened. But I've seen a zillion bands much better than Guns N' Roses ever was.
What was was there any commonality to why someone did make it? Or was it some of it just blind luck? Somebody had to be there on a certain night at a certain show in a certain way that somebody struck somebody?
A lot of it had to do with your image and your looks. Poison made it entirely on their looks. Glam rock was big out there at that time. There was a full-on glam scene. But the bands that semi-made it, I'm going to say they semi-made it because they did get a major label. They were on a major label and actually put out an album or two or whatever. But for some reason did not go on. There was Jet Boy from San Francisco.
Heard of them, yeah.
There was Malice from L.A. There was Shark Island from L.A. Max Havoc from Orange County. At one time, Max Havoc had Bill Ward playing drums for him.
Wow.
They had, what was the original drummer for Wasp? Like Tony Richards. Tony Richards played with, they had Carlos Cavazo at one time. But they still
From
never.
Quiet Riot.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. My first concert.
There was a band called The Unforgiven that ruled the Strip for a year or two, put out one album on a major label. And unfortunately, I was telling you before about Life, Sex, and Death from Chicago. They should have been huge. But for one reason or another, you've been in bands and you know what it's all about. It's hard to keep things together, and inevitably there's always one weak link in a chain.
What do you think happened with you? I mean, you've had this time to kind of self-reflect. Was it, missed opportunity? Where was the disconnect between Nightmare and that next chain and step in the chain?
There were so many bands and so many musicians. Everybody was looking for the next big thing. You had so many opportunities to move in a different direction as far as like another group or whatever. If people would join or people would get together, and if it didn't happen within the snap of a finger, a few months or 6 months, hey, you know what? This ain't doing it. Everybody was jumping ship. It was just like a bunch of dominoes or a bunch of checkers jumping all over the board from this band to this band to this band. And a lot of bands broke up, and I was instrumental in breaking up a couple of them and quitting a couple of them because it just wasn't going fast enough.
Yeah.
Whereas everybody was just too impatient. If we would have been much more impatient and just hung and just been chilled out and been more patient, we'd have got a lot more done and a lot more to show for it.
What about like management of bands? Did that have something to do with it? The ones that did make it, did they have better management?
Management it just depended on what the management knew. If they were real management and had business credentials and had connections, or if it was just somebody like your buddy, your neighbor using the phone and calling people up and trying to get, real managers made a difference. Other managers were just somebody helping. This whole business, I have never had a manager. I never did get to work with a manager. It's like either I was doing the work myself or the whole band was doing it themselves or whatever. But I was just the same as being a manager artist. Same thing like with a baseball player, being a manager, player, or
manager,
whatever.
yeah.
But I never had the privilege of having somebody do something for me. I don't know what it's like.
I feel like a lot of those bands probably did. I know, reading and looking back on it now, they had stylists. You look back on it now and you're like, yeah, a lot of those bands did kind of look the same during this era and then that era. That I think all
There's
that
a lot
helps.
of cookie cutter copying, all that stuff going on.
I think if you got signed to a major label, if you didn't have, there's some major labels, they're not going to sign you unless you have a manager. And there's some major labels that if you got signed and you didn't have one, they would get one for you, or they would point you in the right directions. My friends, the Iron Maidens, the all-girl Iron Maiden tribute band, they were doing all their stuff themselves like everybody else has. And they got picked up by a major management company, the same one that handles Vince Neil and other big acts. Well, you know what? They went from playing Southern California gigs to playing all over the world.
Well, the reason I ask is because I recently met Doc McGee at the Kiss show in St. Louis. And, Doc's been involved in a lot of the bands, the Motley Crues. And I found that fascinating as I was walking around backstage meeting the tour manager, Doc, of course, just the manager, the stage manager.
Yes.
And everybody's looking at me like, who's this guy? And I'm finding it very fascinating. And I met Kiss's tour manager, Steve Toth, and I asked him, how'd you get your start? And he said, I was a front of house guy. I was a sound guy. And then he told me he played in a band in the 80s. And I go, well, who was that? He goes, I'm not going to tell you. But to me, that's fascinating, to the behind the scenes, the organization and how it all operates. And those people are important too. But here I was backstage going, oh my gosh, that's Doc McGee. Oh my gosh, that's Steve Toth. And people are looking at me like, who are they?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's very instrumental in the success of the bands as well.
Well, look what Tom Parker did for Elvis.
Oh, yeah. And he took half his money, too.
And probably more.
Yeah.
But Elvis didn't have any manager before he had Colonel Tom. He was signed to Sun Records. What's that guy? Sun Records. I can't think of his name.
Yeah.
Sam Phillips.
Sam Phillips,
there,
yeah.
All right. He was signed with Sam Phillips on his label, and Sam Phillips was handling his business. But Colonel Tom come down there with $40,000 or $50,000 and bought his contract.
Yep. Put him on RCA.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the rest is history. But no, that would make the difference in the world. And a manager is somebody that believes in you. And well, Brian Epstein and the Beatles. Where would the Beatles have been without Brian Epstein? God only knows.
James Labonte and Labonte Photography are more than just photographers. They're artists. They take great pride in capturing images that you'll be proud to place on your walls for many years for your friends and guests to admire. He's more than just someone with a fancy camera, lights, and software. He'll spend time with you, get to know you, and capture real and authentic portraits of you. For senior photos, special events, weddings, or hey, just some fun family photos you'll treasure forever. Go to Labonte Photography on Facebook or LabontePhoto.com. Say cheese.
Is HGTV on in your house all the time like it is in mine? Is a home improvement project on your wish list? If yes, call my friend Gabe Dexheimer at Dexco Home Renovations. Gabe and his crew recently did a great job for my family kitchen. They can do a great job on your next project too. Indoors, outdoors, decks, kitchens, baths, you name it. No jobs are too big or small. If you have an idea or just want a professional eye to help you realize your dream, call Gabe today at 618-420-1742 for a no-obligation consultation. He helped my family realize a dream kitchen, and he can help all of you too. Let's get it done. Tell me a cool story. I mean, you got a million of them, I'm sure.
Okay, we're talking 1985. Me and Joey Allen, Joey Cagle from Warrant, I was putting together Nightmare 2. Me and him were writing some songs. Okay, we wrote 3 songs, and I was buying some studio time in North Hollywood at a studio called Present Time Recorders. And we worked these 3 songs up, and we went to record them at Present Time Recorders. And Joey brought a buddy with him. And this buddy had really tight blue jeans on, and he had cowboy boots tucked into the blue jeans. Now, it's the first time I'd ever seen that, other than cowboy movies. This is prior Guns N' Roses. This is prior Jet Boy, prior anybody doing that. This guy was like, he was either ahead of the scene or I just hadn't seen it yet, but he had his boots tucked in. Okay. we do the recording session. My engineer was Erwin Kramer. Erwin Kramer had slick black hair, wore Beatle boots, and he looked a lot like Dustin Hoffman.
Mm-hmm.
He was a keyboard player, and he told me that his biggest mistake was he turned down the gig in Toto. He could have been a founding member of Toto,
Wow.
but you know,
With Lukather.
Yeah.
And,
but you know, okay, who, I don't know you guys, blah blah. He didn't jump on it, right? And that was a huge mistake. Later on, he became the keyboard player for the Knack. Erwin did. Okay, this guy with the blue jeans and cowboy boots. We're doing a recording session. We record these 3 songs, and one of them's called Promised Land. And it's a song I wrote about leaving here and moving to California. And he's standing around. I say, hey, man, why don't you sing backup with us here? Oh, the backup is Promised Land. Just scream Promised Land at the same time we do. Okay. His name was Danny Stagg. Danny Stagg later on became the lead guitarist in Kingdom Come,
Uh-huh.
a multi-platinum
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin clone band.
Yes.
All right.
I wasn't going to say it.
That was Danny Stagg. Really bizarre story, but there it is.
Well, here's a question. So I've seen some pictures of you with Nikki Sixx, Tommy Lee. I mean, were you running into these guys, the Van Halen guys? Did you run into them? I know you mentioned Gene Simmons. Were you seeing these super popular bands, these musicians, Dawkins, the Rats? Were you seeing these people around?
You know what? I've ran into all of them. I've met all of them, and it was here and there. And it's basically you're right there where they're all at. So if you're out and about, eventually you're going to run into people. Now, when I met Tommy Lee, I was at the Warrant Cherry Pie recording sessions, and he was hanging out at the studio. And Joey just got a brand new Lexus or whatever. And we went out and was checking out his car. And at the same time, they fired up something they shouldn't have been smoking. And I had my camera with me, and we got some pictures of group shots, you know, all together in his car and everything. And I went back in, and later on, Janie Lane come in and was doing some acoustic stuff and Uncle Tom's Cabin stuff. And him and Tommy Lee started comparing tattoos, and I got pictures of them guys showing their tattoos and stuff.
Not comparing anything else. Joey might have lost that.
Yeah,
No.
Janie would have lost, right?
Well, you know, later on in life, Janie married the Cherry Pie girl on the video.
Bobby Brown.
And he was out on tour, and Tommy Lee was taking care of stuff at home where Janie Lane wasn't.
Boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, exclusive right here.
And that did not fare well on their tour, and it cut a tour short.
Well, hey, speaking of Warrant and touring, I don't know if it's okay if I bring this up, but they're going to be here this coming Saturday in St. Charles, Missouri at the Family Arena. I know you're great friends with all the Warrant guys. You saw them play at the Effingham Performance Center. And I saw that, and I'm like, I was trying to make that connection. I'm like, wait, Rod? Seems like Rod knows the Warrant guys. So, and then you told the story about meeting Joey as a teenager guitar player. I assume you'll be there.
Yeah, anytime when they're within this neck of the woods and I can make it, they take care of me. I'm going to go back to Nightmare 1. We were playing a gig at a rehearsal studio that had a stage and turned it into a big after-hours party place. And up in the balcony, Eric Turner's looking down watching me. This is before Eric Turner was ever in Warrant, or way before he even moved to Hollywood. Well, Eric Turner was jamming with me and later on, and I introduced him to Joey. That's how those two got me.
How about
met.
that?
I know.
And
That's crazy.
Eric went on to Hollywood. Joey stayed back and was playing with a band called Targa. Eric was with Warrant, and they had some turnover issues, and he called up Joey and said, hey, there's an opening. Come up here and audition, and he got the gig. I can tell you some other stuff, but we'll do that off the air.
Well, I got to say, the only time I ever saw Warrant was with Trickster and Firehouse, and I know Firehouse will be at this show.
I saw that show too.
One of the best live sounding bands I've ever heard, Firehouse. Awesome.
I got a friend of mine that knows those guys real well.
But I wanted to say that I'm pretty sure that show was a few days, maybe a week after the infamous
Guns riot.
Guns N' Roses.
Yeah.
And I remember all the blue chairs that were missing.
Right.
You know, didn't go to the gun show. I don't know why, but anyway. So.
You mentioned just on the way here to Mount Olive, you were on the phone with Joey, right?
Yeah, we were talking. I'm bringing him some stuff, and he's going to hook me up with some stuff there, too. And I'm going to tell you another Joey Allen story. We were rehearsing at a studio in Costa Mesa. We had a friend. He had a friend, a drummer named Greg Fisk. Greg Fisk later on became one of my Nightmare 2 drummers.
Okay.
All right, we're jamming, And they were telling me a story. Joy's telling me a story. He goes, I was playing with these other guys, and we auditioned a drummer, and he didn't make the cut, and we let him go. And damned if all hell, it didn't turn out to be Lars Ulrich. So can you imagine Lars auditioning for Joy and his buddies and not making the cut?
Not making the cut.
All right. In the same rehearsal, a black guy comes, a Jamaican, with a thick Jamaican accent. A black guitar player comes in, and he breaks out a flying V, and he starts shredding on it. So we're all jamming, and this black guy's jamming with us, and he's Rasta, and jamming heavy metal. He's a heavy metal guitar player from Jamaica, right? Well, that was Lloyd Grant, and that's where I met my buddy Lloyd Grant. Lloyd Grant played on Metallica's first recording, Turn Out the Lights or Hit the Lights.
Hit the Lights, yeah.
He did the lead tracks in his living room, and they hustled that tape up to Brian Slagle at Metal Blade Records, and it was on their first compilation album. There's only 1,000 copies of that, and if you got one, it's worth several $100s. The first 1,000 copies had Lloyd Grant on it. That's all they pressed, all right? The thing sold out, so they started making more copies. And after that, Dave Mustaine. They re-recorded it with Dave Mustaine. And I got many Lloyd Grant stories. I've become friends with Lloyd, and Lloyd is so tight with Metallica that anytime and anywhere they play, he gets taken very well care of. And I've gone with him to several Metallica shows and drank their beer in their dressing room on several occasions.
We've got a can right up there on the shelf that Toby had. Yeah, Internet. Yeah. Tell me what's going on with Rod today. So eventually you're out there 29 years. You did it. You rocked it. You came back to this area.
I jammed out there till 2003. I moved back in 2011. At 2003, after about 20 years out there, the candle had burned at both ends. I just ran out of gas. I couldn't continue working in the day and partying at night and work, it caught up with me and I needed a break. So in 2003 was the last time, or I had a band right then called just Rotten Rod. And it was guys from other bands that I jammed with that they were backing me up. And we went into the recording studio and recorded about an album's worth of material that got released on different compilation CDs and other things, some of them, but not all of it. And that material, is the best stuff I ever did. And it's still waiting to be released one way or the other on an album. And I'm debating about maybe even going so far as putting it out on my own label, like I have a lot of my other product. But in 2000, I quit jamming in 2003. I would make cameo appearances or, jump up on stage and jam with people. But trying to pursue and keep a band together and doing everything, I stopped. And at that point, in 2001, I started getting back into dirt bike riding. I competed vintage motocross. It was old guys on old bikes, and I was racing every week. So for the last 10 years in California was mostly all dirt bike riding and off-road riding. I became a desert rat and spent all my time out in the desert. And at the same time, I hosted a TV show. I had somebody come up and said, hey, we want you to host our cable TV show. So I would do the NAMM show, and I'd be sticking the microphone in everybody's face and interviewing them and stuff. And I did that for 3 or 4 years. When I moved back here, I was kind of retired from music. I really kind of burnt out on it. I still had my foot in the door, but it's like being in a band. I wasn't. When I moved back here, there was a band in Hillsboro called, what was Johnny Marr's band's name? I can't think of it. I'm having a brain fart. Well, I would jump up and jam with them. After a year or two jam with these guys, I said, you know what? Would you guys be interested in putting together an AC/DC band? Just doing nothing but AC/DC. And we put together Riff Raff.
Right.
And Riff Raff was unique in the because we played 4 hours of AC/DC. We didn't just play 1 hour, we played 4 hours.
And Bon Scott, AC/DC.
Yes.
Only Bon Scott.
That's it.
Yeah.
You know what? It takes a hardcore fan to sit there and listen for 4 hours. But we did it, and the people hung around, and we did it for a few years, and then it finally ran its course. But at the same time, I was doing open mic nights in Charlax up in St. Charles, Missouri. I'd go up there on a Thursday night and jump up and do a couple AC/DC songs. Our old buddy BJ Sievers turned me on to that place. BJ's no longer with us. But he turned me on to that place. I went up there, and I was doing it. And a really attractive blonde named Kat Moose, that's a promoter, and she's kind of like a manager, promoter, disc jockey, the whole 9 yards up there. She's into music. She come up to me afterwards. She says, "There's an AC/DC band in here looking for a singer. What's your phone number?" I gave her my phone number, and they gave me a call, and I auditioned for them and got that gig. And I've been playing with them out of St. Louis, AZDZ, ever since.
So you need to plug your event that's coming up.
Yeah.
Well, we're playing in 1 week after Warrant. We're playing the same place, the St. Charles Family Arena, with a Sammy Hagar band and a
Red. That's Red.
Yeah.
And Killer Queen, right?
Killer Queen from England.
Yeah. And so when you think about coming full circle to what you're doing now, Rod, I mean, St. Charles Family Arena, it's not a small joint. It's an arena,
A concert venue.
and when you think about where you went all these years ago, out there, you're playing the Whiskey, the Troubadour, the Gazaris, wherever it was you were playing, all these backyard parties, hoping to get to an arena. You quit. What's it feel like now that you're on an arena stage?
It's a trip. I mean, it's like, where were you when I needed you?
Yeah.
Better late than never.
Yeah.
But this is the second time we've played there. We played there a couple years ago, and it's like a 10,000, 12,000 seater. But when we play, and I don't know if it's going to be like that this coming up, but they cut it in half. They put the stage in the middle of the floor, not all the way in the back, and they curtain off half the place, so it turns into a 5,000 seater.
Still not bad.
I think that's what they're doing at the Firehouse Warrant Brett Michaels. I saw, when you're trying to order tickets online, I think I saw that.
But that's still 5,000.
Hey, it's an arena.
It's a beautiful place. Have you ever been there before? Because I've seen
I have
Judas
not.
Priest there, Whitesnake. They have some good bands, and but the AZDZ band from St. Louis, they're in a different market, different. They play bigger and better venues. Since I've been with that band, I've got to play the Chesterfield Amphitheater. This will be my second gig at the Family Arena. We've played Pops on several occasions, and one time when we played Pops, we played with Red and I forget who else. I think it was a Bad Company band, but that night pulled in 1,200 people, and that place was packed.
Yeah, the Bad Company band's my friend Alan Hanner drums in that band. He's also got the Head Knocker of the
Yes.
Foreigner tribute. Yeah. So that's cool. I mean, go online, get the tickets. I'm sure you can get them on the Family Arena website and take care of that. Rod, what haven't we asked you? Toby, what else do we need to talk to Rod about?
Well, like I said, I visited Rod at his house. I had to hear these stories like, who'd you meet? And he showed me his room, and he's got lots of memorabilia, and he's met a lot of people. And like you said, there's probably more stories than there are hours for those stories.
we can always have you back.
We can always
Rod.
come back. But
The Hillsborough band, I was trying to think it was Somebody's Ex. Do you remember that?
oh yeah,
band?
yeah,
Yeah,
somebody's
yeah.
ex.
All right, that's
Yeah.
who I jump up and jam with all.
Yeah.
And the CD here, this Rotten Rod CD, it's a Warheads Raw 10 recital. These are the same songs that I wrote back here. But in 1996, out in California, I was in between bands, and my buddy Tony Bramall said, "Hey, man, why did you ever record those songs?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, we need to record them." So this CD that I got here, it's me being backed up by Tony Bramall's punk band at the time, which was the Gray Spikes. We recorded the same songs that I wrote before I moved to California. So I wrote them and recorded them 10 years later with a California punk band backing me up. And after we did it, I thought, you know what, this is good enough. I started putting together a band called Rotten Rod and the Warheads, and we started playing gigs to back up to sell this CD.
Rod, normally I can't play music on a podcast because of rights and everything else. Can we put one of those songs in the show?
Sure.
We'll do that. Which one should we play?
The Rod is Rotten.
The Rod is Rotten. So let's hear it right here on the What's That Like podcast. The Rod is Rotten. tell me, what was the inspiration behind that song?
That was my theme song.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to tell everybody what I was like and what it was about. So
there you go. Right here on the What's That Like podcast, you've got some Rotten Rod and the Warheads. I don't know what else to say. I mean, thank you for coming by. You'll come back again, won't you? We
Sure.
got more stories to tell.
yeah, we just touched the iceberg here.
Yeah, and
tip of the iceberg.
And this isn't all for you. Every Friday, once a month, you've got a show you do.
I do a radio show, WDLJ 97.5 FM, over out of Carlisle, Illinois. And we do a show called the Rockzone Legends. And I have a engineer co-host, Randy Alderman. It's actually his baby. He's letting me set in with him. But he used to be a DJ at WGEL. And how I met him was I used to send him the old Nightmare 2 records, and he would spin them. And every so often I'd call in and talk to him and give him a report from L.A. WGEL went country a long time ago, 20 years ago. A while back, somebody from WDLJ said, Randy, hey, why don't you come back and resurrect the Rock Zone show? Do it once or twice a year. And he did it and had a good time. And I happened to be home, and he said, hey, you want to come and do this with us? And I did, and it turned into a monthly gig now.
Cool. And that streams online, too.
Yes, it does.
And they can follow you on Facebook at Rotten Rod, right?
That's Dennis Carlock, Rotten Rod, and also the WDLJ.com. They got a website and a Facebook page, and Rockzone Legends.
Yeah, I'll link to those. I'll make sure I link to the Rockzone Legends, because half the time you're in Facebook jail, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
That's always the fun part.
I am not politically correct, and I'm as deplorable as they get.
Well, Toby, anything else to ask?
No, I just, I said earlier, I had that question in 1983, who's the Rod? And now I'm proud to say, I know who the Rod is.
You know what? I will say this here. Now, if you want to know anything further, if you Google Rotten Rod, all kinds of stuff from my past out in California pops up. And if you go to YouTube and type in Rotten Rod, there's a bunch of Warheads videos, and there's a bunch of live Me at the Whiskey. There's we had a half a dozen or so that were poor man MTV quality that got played on a zillion different cable TV shows in California. So they look something like off MTV. So you can YouTube Rotten Rod and Google Rotten Rod, and there's all kinds of neat stuff that pop up.
Rod, thank you for coming. I'm sure this is the nicest studio you've ever been
impressed.
In Mount Olive, Illinois, though.
I'm impressed.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Rod, thanks for coming on the show.
You know what? I got a bunch of extra stuff, and you got some space here. I could donate some stuff here.
we can decorate it up. Rod, Toby, anything else?
No, this has been great. Thank you for coming, Rod. John, thanks for having me on as a guest.
Yeah, well, you were a good guest host. Thanks, guys.
Thanks
Appreciate
a lot, guys.
it.
Well, there you had it, Rotten Rod. Talked a lot about his affiliation with the guys in the band Warrant. If you're listening to this on post day, which I think is October 10th, on this Saturday, October 12th, Warrant is actually at that same family arena down in St. Charles. Go check those guys out. Rod will be there. You can say hi to him. And then again, as we talked about before, the next weekend on October 19th, Rod and AZDC and Killer Queen and Sammy Hagar tribute Red will be there. Go check those guys out. Have some fun. If not, come over to Hillsboro. See Toby and I, once again, like I said, at the Halftime Bar and Grill on October 19th. And then 1026 at the Opera House. It's going to be a big show. Can't wait to see that. Probably wondering, hey, where's Bob? Well, how come Bob hasn't been on here? We got big Bob news coming. Bob, this coming weekend, is actually testing a Formula 4 car, racing car, at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So we're going to have him on real quick to talk about that, what he's going to be doing with his future. He's not producing here at the What's That Like podcast as much as he was before. He's still a member of the family, though, and we want to make sure you hear all about him, so we'll get that news out to you fairly quickly. Watch the Facebook page for some cool stuff that Bobby Krug and the ATA Network are doing. So that's it for this edition of the What's That Like podcast. Peace out.
What's That Like is available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Search for What's That Like. Subscribe today and never miss an episode. Streaming is available at SoundCloud.com and on the SoundCloud app. Follow What's That Like at Facebook.com/What's That Like podcast. And on Twitter at What's That Like Pod. All opinions of the guests of the What's That Like podcast are their own, not necessarily the views of the host or the podcast producers. We hope you enjoy this podcast serving Central Illinois and beyond. Peace out!